Hi there, I'm Vishal and I'm a solutions architect here at Magnolia. My primary focus is around front-end technologies such as JavaScript, React.js, AngularJS and Vue.js as well. So I'm happy to support in any sort of front-end questions you may have. Today what we're going to be looking at is the Headless Accelerator, and we're going to cover four main points to do with it. Firstly, what is the Headless Accelerator? After that, we'll look at how we bootstrap a new project, how we go from having no code at all, no Magnolia, no React application at all, to bootstrapping that up, creating an instance of Magnolia, wiring that up with React.js, and seeing how the two come together. The third thing we're going to look at is, naturally after that, is once a project is being bootstrapped, we want to go along and create a component first of all. After that, we'll look at how we create a content app and we see how we bring everything together. So let's first take a look at what the Headless Accelerator is. And we'll look at what it is and how it works. So regarding what it is, the way that I'd kind of look at it is that the Headless Accelerator is a fantastic way of shipping reliable, fast code with great developer experience. Really fun, intuitive developer experience. How it goes about doing that is, well, there's perhaps two or three main points of the Headless Accelerator. The point that we'll be looking at today is how we generate code from scratch, be that a component or the actual instance of Magnolia, and then how a very clever watching task comes along and watches the code that's being changed and does some very interesting thing to keep the quality of the code high and keep the speed, to have lots of speed when we're developing, and all around just to have a great developer experience. We will cover some of the other stuff as well, which is around Storybook and some stuff to do with web components as well. Okie dokie, let's move straight into bootstrapping a new project. What we're going to do is we're going to come along and use a command that I'll show you in a moment to bootstrap a project. And what that command is going to do is download an instance of Magnolia, fire up that instance of Magnolia, do the same thing with React.js, and then the orange arrow that you can see there is basically the glue of Magnolia and a front-end technology like React.js coming together, all the configuration. And that bootstrapping process does all of that for us. So let's dive into the code and actually take a look at how that takes place. So if I get my terminal window up, what I do to bootstrap a project is I'd come in and I'd fire off this command over here, jumpstart. And as I said to you before, that downloads in and starts up Magnolia. Same thing with the React project as well. And the output of that is what we see inside the IDE over here. Here's a version, a project that I bootstrapped, and the first thing we see is this folder structure over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delve into some of these files over here to help you get an understanding of the structure of the project. First of all, what we can see is at the top we have this .magnolia jumpstart folder. And the .magnolia jumpstart folder is basically the normal Magnolia instance. So how you would see Magnolia if you didn't fire it off from the Headless Accelerator. And we can see some light modules over here, which we'll go into a little bit more depth in just a second. We can see the Apache Tomcat folder, which is basically where the application is hosted, and then run from there on localhost. And this basically means that if I do want to stray away, move away from the Headless Accelerator and go back to doing work the way I used to do without the Headless Accelerator, or perhaps to do some customized work, and we always have that option of doing it. So that's a .magnolia jumpstart file, which is the normal way of working with Magnolia. What we see outside that folder though is this folder structure over here. And this folder structure over here has been very much designed to look and feel like a normal front-end project. So for any of our front-end developers, when they come along and see this, they're going to feel very at home with the folder structure. They'll be able to traverse around and understand relatively quickly, pretty quickly, how this project works and how to make changes to those projects. The first thing that I think is most important to look at is this components folder over here. If we go into the components folder, we can see three components really: column layout, headline, and text and image component. And that comes outside the box for us with the Headless Accelerator. You don't have to use that. It's just there to give us a guideline on how these components are structured and so on. If you go into the headline folder over here, we can see these 4, 5, 6 files over here. And this basically is a feature-based folder structure. So what do I mean by that? Anything to do with headline is stored within this folder over here. And it makes it very easy to traverse around, to make changes to the headline component, and not having to go into different folders and different locations and open different files and get quite confused. So that's what the benefit is of that feature-based folder structure. Let's take a look at these files now. The first one over here is this YAML file. And this YAML file really drives Magnolia. It's a decorating file that is used as a light module. Now what do I mean by that? I can come along over here and build out a form, say what its properties are, and basically list them down. As we can see over here, the properties and types of the properties and the values of the properties, sorry. And then Magnolia will take that in and build out a form for us. So as we can see, if we look at this, this over here will be a form associated with the headline component over here. And we'll look at that in a bit more depth in just a second. And we can see that this headline component will have a name and a title, my apologies, and also a description. And that is basically tied in to this React component over here. This React component is a headline, and it prints out a H1 tag with a title. And the title, as you can see, comes from here. Okay, so there it is over there. We can see on the second line, or line number 8 over here, we have a description and we have some kind of dangerous HTML over here, which we'll get rid of in a second. It's just for the default Headless Accelerator. We have a description over here of the props, which comes in from this form over here. So the data from this form over here comes into the React component, and we can start to utilize and use those pieces of data. So that's what it is there. There's a React component, there's a YAML file for the light module development. Next we have the .stories.js file, and this is basically the configuration for Storybook, and it means that we can trigger off a command. I think off the top of my head it's something like HA Storybook, and what that will do is open up a window with the React component, which is the headline over here, and it allows us to create a visual representation, a visual documentation of all of our components. And within Storybook, I'm sure some of you will know what it is. We can change the pieces of data straight within the documentation and see how the component reacts to that. Now this file over here, the last one that I'm going to talk about, is a model.ts file. And this is a TypeScript file. And as many of you would know, TypeScript is becoming the standard. It really is the standard within front-end development for various reasons. I can remember when I first came onto a TypeScript project, I found that within 2 or 3 months of using it, I was quite surprised that I wasn't using the dev tools and the debugging tools very much. And that's because TypeScript really eliminates a lot of the low-level bugs that you find with writing plain old JavaScript, a lot of the undefined bugs and things like that. So TypeScript has significant benefits. And what we'll see over here, if we go back to the IDE, how powerful the Headless Accelerator is in dealing with TypeScript. When I created a component, or in this case, the one that came out the box with the Headless Accelerator, it writes the TypeScript for us. So as you can see over here, it has a title and a description, and that's based on the YAML file that we put over here. So the TypeScript is written for us, and that saves us a lot of headache as a developer having to write the TypeScript interfaces over here. The Headless Accelerator writes it for us. And not only does it write it for us, it also, as I said to you before, it's a very clever watching tool as well. It watches the code that we have, and as we make changes to our code, it actually updates things that are very important. So let's take a look at that. I want this to change to just title over here, not the description. I don't need a description in this instance. I will get rid of that. I will save that, and let's take a look at the TypeScript model over here. We can see immediately that the description is gone, and all that's left is the title over here. We can see the headline component in red. There's a problem there. Let's go back and see what that problem is. We're using description, but because the TypeScript model has been imported in and used over here against props, the description now is invalid. So that tells me that, and I can get rid of that, and everything is fine now. So as we've seen over here, the power of the Headless Accelerator, what it's capable of doing. Let's take a look at some of the advantages there. When we bootstrap the project, first of all, we can see that it gives us configuration between Magnolia and JavaScript framework being React.js. We didn't look into that too much, but it does do some stuff to bind the two together and make that development process a lot faster, which we'll see in the next section, which is making the component. All around, again, great DX experience, fast with that TypeScript, is very reliable. So that bootstrapping jumpstart command that the Headless Accelerator gives us is very much like Create React App. And I'm sure a lot of React developers will know how Create React App really changed the ecosystem of React applications and of how developers work. We don't have to worry about Webpack anymore. We don't have to configure things anymore. It's all done for us. We can fire up a project and start working straight away. Of course, if we want to come back and change stuff, we've got that .magnolia jumpstart folder that I showed you in the beginning. We can dive into that and start making customized changes if we need to. But getting up and running is very quick, very seamless. And for the most part, the jumpstart gives us what we need, and we can work in most scenarios. And we can accomplish the task that we need to accomplish. Brilliant. Okay, let's move on now to the next portion, which is creating a component. We looked at creating a component, we looked at the default component that comes up with us when we first start up the Headless Accelerator. We're going to create a new component now and start to look at some of the advantages of how we can, how creating that component in the accelerator benefits us. Some of them are on the right hand side over here, but let's go in and take a look now at how we do that. I'm going to share my screen again, like so. Switch over to the terminal, and what we would do is we can type in a command over here. I think it's generate component, I think it was, something along those lines. But what we're going to do is something different. We're going to switch over to this integrated terminal environment over here. And this integrated terminal environment gives us significant advantages in terms of the workflow, the entire developer experience, working with React, working with Magnolia. And let's take a look at what that is. Bottom left hand corner, I'll highlight it. Bottom left hand corner over here in this box over here. This is the Magnolia output from the Java application, telling us what's going wrong with the backend, giving us any feedback. Next to it on the right hand side over here is the JavaScript React output. We can see Webpack 5 over there telling us what's happening with the transpiler Babel, giving us any errors, giving us feedback. Excuse me. At the top over here, we can see an additional window giving us feedback, and that's from the Headless Accelerator itself. So now we have 3 pieces of feedback if we do have a bug that we can look at in one window, and that avoids us from having to switch between windows and try to find out what the bug is. I know myself as a developer, when I'm looking for a bug, I look into the JavaScript window, the Webpack output, and I may miss what's happening in the Java window just because I'm in that workflow. And that's something that's, that happens. Over here, everything's in one, and we can see if there's any problems going on, whatever that may be. Now, that's the integrated terminal environment. There's an additional thing that I want to show you. Rather than writing commands that I kind of alluded on in this window over here, what we can do instead is press the button C. We press the key C, and we get this window up over here. This window allows us to create a component, an app, or a page just by using the mouse pointer over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a component. We're going to call it trainers. So we're going to make an application that displays some trainers, okay, or a list of trainers. I'm going to make a component over here. I'm going to create that, let it happen, come back into the into the IDE. We can see over here, there's the trainers over there. Let me just come along and close these down to make it a little bit more simple, because I'm a person, I don't like too much clutter in my IDE. It gives me headaches. Right, over here, trainers over here. Once again, the YAML file over there, the light development, making the form that's associated with the component. The component over here, as we saw before, storybook and the TypeScript model up at the top. What we're going to do is we're going to create the form for the trainers, and we're going to say something like name, and then we're going to have a subtitle over here. Some marketing lingo will go up over here. There's a subtitle over there. I'll save that, and that's all I need to do to configure the form associated with the React component, so I can put data coming in as props over here. Now, the only thing I have to do to get that component up and running for me to consume in Magnolia is go to the root template that's being used. In this case, it's called column layout, because we're driving our application, a page through columns. And all I have to do is just add it over here. All it is trainers, as long as my spelling's right. And put in trainers there, trainers there, and that's it. Moving over to the Magnolia authoring experience. This is it over here. I'll just refresh to make sure everything's loaded up well. I'll go over to pages over here. We get a default page over here, standard page over here, coming in from the Headless Accelerator to allow us to move quickly. And that page should come up. There it is there. Just refresh that. We get the green bars that allow us to edit the page. And what we'll do is, first of all, as I showed you before, we'll add a column layout. That's that over there. We'll make it a one column layout, make it nice and simple. Go into the actual column over there and add trainers over there. Voila. That comes up. Here's the form associated with the component. I'll get rid of that. There's the form over there. Name and subtitle over there. Name and subtitle over here. I'll put inside trainers here, and I'll say something like, take a look at our range of cool, I'll say funky. I'm feeling funky today. Funky trainers. I do like a funky trainer once in a while. Okay, there you go. Save those changes. We should see though that title coming up. Subtitles not there. Let's look at something very interesting and another aspect of great developer experience and high quality code. We'll go back into this component over here. We want to add in the subtitle. I'll make it a H2. I'll put in the prop over here, and I press dot. There's a type ahead for me. Title is there, subtitles there. That's being fed in from the TypeScript interface over here, automatically written for us. The clever watcher in the background of the Headless Accelerator, updating this interface for us, allowing to use type ahead. We go back into the authoring experience, and there it is over there. Trainers, take a look at our range of funky trainers. Absolutely fantastic indeed. Right, so there it is there. We get an idea of how we can create components, how quick it is to create components, fast, high quality with that TypeScript, machine generated TypeScript, great user experience regarding a type ahead. You know, developers know what data they can put in to their components automatically. Feature-based folder structure, we talked about that before, but we saw the advantage of that in use when we actually created the component. Machine generated configuration, all the component and the Magnolia, how the component gets fed into Magnolia is machine generated, happens on the fly. All that configuration is done, so we don't have to worry about all that stuff. Real advantage around that. Brilliant. Let's now move on to creating a content app. And first of all, I'll explain to you what a content app is. So, let's get a little glass of water there. So when we say a content app, what we mean by that is some way of adding data into Magnolia via a form, storing that data in Magnolia, and then exposing that data as a REST API, finally in the React application, consuming that data, and then listing it. Listing it is part of the React application, but everything before consuming it is part of creating and building a content app. Very standard stuff that we do day to day in web development. So let's see how we can do that then. I'll go back, I'll share my screen. I'll make that a bit larger over here, and we'll look at how we create a content app. First thing we'll do again is go back into the integrated terminal environment. Come along, we press C, and we create an app this time, not a component, an app, and we call it trainers list, something along those lines, and then we create that over there. And if we go in back to the IDE, we can see, I'll close this down, I'll leave that open, but we can see a MGNL app folder has been created, and here over here is the content app. So we see this Magnolia apps folder over here, and here we can see the list, the app, which is the trainers list over here. Once again, it's a feature-based folder structure as we saw before. This time, a limited amount of files. The first one over here is the actual light development YAML file that we use to model the form that we'll use to input data into the content app. And then next to it, of course, is this TypeScript file over here. And once again, the same watching mechanism takes place with this. I can come along and delete a lot of the properties. I don't want too much going on here. And all I really want is something along the lines of a title, and let's say, for example, over here, a brand. Yep, something along those lines. I'll create a brand over here. And I'll call it brand, and that will be it there. So once this is done, we can go over to this TypeScript file over here, and once again we see that changing inside the TypeScript file, title and brand only, reflecting the changes we've made in the content app over here. I can close this down now. I'll close that down as well, and I'll move over back into Magnolia. And we'll see, there it is there, trainers list has been initialized. I can come along, oops, daisy. I just have to log back into Magnolia, and if I go into the list of apps available to us, I can see trainers list over there. If I go into trainers list, I see this window over here, this screen over here, and what I'm able to do is add in new trainers. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, I'm going to give this trainer the name Nike. Let's call it Air Maxes, something like that, or Air Max. In fact, I suspect the title will be Air Max, and the brand is Nike. I'll save that change over there. I'll come along, I'll add another item, and let's say, for example, these ones are Adidas, like so. I'll say that's the brand over there. I'll say Originals. Okay, something like that over there. Save the changes. Maybe we can have one more, and that can be All Stars, Converse. Sorry, that'll be the brand over there, and then the All Stars will be the title. Oops, daisy, title as well. Brilliant. I'll save those changes. Now we have this list of 3 different types of trainers that we have. We can now render that list in the component we created before. So what we can do to do that is, if we go back into the trainers over here, we can start to build out a list to show the 3 trainers that we put into the content app. But I want to show you something very interesting indeed. First of all, if I go back to the content app over here, which is a trainers list, we see that over here with the name and the brand of the trainers, and I go into the TypeScript file, we do have this TypeScript interface over here that you're familiar with now. But we also have this very interesting piece of code over here. And this piece of code is very interesting in that it is written out the API call that we need to make to request those lists of trainers from the Magnolia REST API. There's the URL there. There's the path trainers list over there. It's using Axios, and we can put a limit on it if we want to. This comes outside the box for us. Very much I know from my experience as a developer, when I've come into sprints and we come to point up stories, when a developer has to make an API call to get some data and then display that data on the screen, the points tend to go up 2, maybe 3 points. Over here, this has been created for us. The Headless Accelerator writes it in for us. In addition to that, we're also working on some stuff to be able to make more sophisticated API calls, and that's in the pipeline. So things are always happening with the Headless Accelerator. Right, now let's take a look at how we can consume this endpoint. We'll use this list all function over here to render out the trainers in the component we've created. Now, I've come along because I didn't want to write it while you lot are watching. So I've come along and I've got a file ready made over here, a little bit like Blue Peter. So I'll come along, get that over here, go back to this over here. This is the component rendering out the title and the subtitle, and I'll replace that over there. And I'll just go through some of the code with you. First of all, what I'm doing is I'm going to that content app trainers list. I'm importing the model over there. If we look into that model, we can see ID, path, additional pieces of data on that content app or the content pool that is added into from Magnolia to help us to do additional things that we might want to do. We might want to click on the trainer and go to a certain path, for example. But the data that we've added is title and brand, and we can see that there. Out the box, it's inside there. The second thing is this function over here, or this class over here. I'm not quite sure exactly what that is, but you get my drift, and it has a list all function on it. And that allows us to fetch the data, and then of course we're setting that data onto this set trainers or the trainers property over here using useState. Then we come along over here and render that out in a iterator map function over here. Brilliant. Let's take a look at what that looks like now. If we go back into the page over here and we click inside here, we can see if we scroll down, there it is there. There's that component. The title, the subtitle as we created before, and then the pieces of data we inputted via a form into the content app. We expose it automatically as a REST API. Magnolia writes the request to that REST API in the JavaScript. We consume that piece of code that Magnolia has written, or the accelerator, I should say, has written, and then we can come along and render out that list over there. Brilliant. So if you come along and look at some of the advantages, we can see again machine generated TypeScript with the content app, better quality of code, higher quality of code, faster, great DX experience, machine generated API calls, huge advantage, really makes things easier and a lot more faster. And those are the advantages around creating a content app. Okay, brilliant. That comes to the end really of the 4 points. I did say before that I was going to touch on some of the other aspects of the Headless Accelerator, and that really focuses around the web components library that we have that comes outside the box, and that's like Toast UI components, input fields, buttons, and so on. And our way of implementing that is using Stencil.js. And the reason why we've used Stencil.js is that we're using a native web standards API, which basically means that the components, if you do want to use our library of components, very much like Bootstrap or Material UI, they will be future-proof because they're using the web component standard and they run natively in the browser. And that kind of concludes what the Headless Accelerator is. There are a few more things around the Headless Accelerator that are very excited. The fact that you can extend out templates and create your own jump-starting templates. So if you had certain requirements, for example, if you're an agency and you want to do the same thing over and over again, you can extend out the Headless Accelerator and do that. And if anyone wants to get in contact with me, you're more than welcome to. My name is Vishal again, and I'll be happy to converse and talk to you about the Headless Accelerator or anything else to do with front-end technologies. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it and have a lovely day.